I think it's safe to say one of Jesus' best known miracles, and maybe one of the most creative ones, is the one we heard today, the feeding of the 5,000. For any of those Bible scholars out there, this includes Jose Reyes, one of our seminarians, aside from the resurrection, the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000 is the only miracle recorded in all four Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The only one. So obviously the Gospel writers must have considered this to be a significant miracle. But for me, maybe you too, I find it a bit unusual. Like I said, it's creative. Now, Jesus had many miracles, and I can kind of get my head around the man being born blind, he was healed of blindness. Raising Lazarus from the dead, he was dead, now he's alive. The healing of the 10 lepers, they had leprosy, and then they're cured. So kind of like one thing to another. Still amazing, but more or less I can comprehend it. But how did the bread and fish multiply? Could the people, we could probably use our imagination. Could the people see this happening? They said Jesus distributed the bread and fish. Well, did he have a basket? He kept on reaching into it, kept on pulling out fish and bread. We don't know. It's very creative, but it's a precursor, as we're going to hear in the next few Sundays, the Bread of Life discourse, of the Eucharist. And of course, the Eucharist is a mystery as well. How does that simple bread and wine become the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ? So I think it's kind of fun to sometimes put yourself into these gospel stories, use your healthy imagination, and see what happens. But sometimes also familiarity sets in with some of these gospel stories. For example, like the prodigal son. For those faithfully attending Mass, faithful Christians over the years, sometimes, we've heard these stories over and over again. And sometimes we may lose the message of the gospel. We may tune out, we listen to it, be complacent. Okay, I've heard it before, I know how that's going to go, I know how it's going to end. It doesn't surprise us anymore. We know how it's going to end. But sometimes, but this familiar gospel miracle, one we heard today, has withstood the test of time because it still has a message for us. And one is, actually there's two we'll get to, but first one is, Jesus is a model of compassion for the needy. He not only meets the needs of their souls with his ministry of teaching them, breaking open the word, but then he recognizes, well, they got to be hungry by now. They've been following me around looking for signs and miracles in my teachings, and he meets their physical needs of hunger by feeding them in this miraculous way. So in the same sense, we have that same responsibility to care for ourselves and each other. Maybe not quite with that miracle our Lord did, but he reminds us of this today to be that compassionate and loving person. And another message, which we will talk a little bit more about, is entrusting our God-given gifts to our Lord. Look what he did with a meager offering of bread and fish. He turned it into a banquet, a lavish banquet. God gives us more than we could ever possibly want, more than we ever need. 12 wicker baskets of fragments were left over from this feast. He is extravagant in his mercy. And again, kind of going back into your imagination, at least for myself, into the gospel story. We have this young boy, and he's the only one mentioned in the Gospel of John with this miracle. The young boy, you guess, maybe 8, 9, 10 years old, we don't know. But let's kind of pretend, what did he think when Jesus did this to the bread and fish he gave him? Way to go, Jesus. Boy, that was really cool. We don't know. But it was a great memory, I'm sure, for that young child to see what our Lord did with that simple offering. So do we entrust our gifts to Jesus, no matter how limited we think they are? God does not need a lot to work with, as this miracle proves. So do we offer what we have in order to be made more plentiful in serving God's kingdom? So why do we entrust our lives to him? Why should we do this? Can't we just get by without offering what we have to God and just kind of go our way without him in our lives? Well, Jesus tells us that he is the vine and we are the branches. Without him, we can do nothing. Pretty strong words that we need him in our lives to cope, to feel fulfilled, to endure, to persevere, to live life to the fullest according to his will. But it's not only our gifts that he has given us. We can also offer up some of those trials that we go through to the Lord, that any trials that we're dealing with today maybe. Because no problem is too big for Jesus, even though we think it overwhelms us maybe, but no problem is too big for our Lord. We kind of saw a little snippet of this in the gospel because Andrew and Philip, they're trying to figure this out. How are we going to feed everybody? And Andrew was doing the calculations, how much wages we're going to need, blah, blah, blah. And it's not going to be enough to feed them. But Philip kind of just planted the seed. He said, well, there's this young boy here. Maybe we can use him. And of course, they were being tested, and the Lord knew this. Sometimes we are tested with our trials as well. But Jesus had the answer when I stepped aside and let him perform the miracle of the multiplication of the loaves. So we have to trust that Jesus is the solution to our problems, our trials that we're dealing with. And by offering what we have to our Lord, we stay close to him. Then we are better prepared to be that model of compassion that I mentioned earlier for those most in need. And sometimes we do not have to look too far for that opportunity to be compassionate. We may not have to travel across the globe or travel across the city. It could be right on our own doorstep. It could be someone in our own family, maybe a child or a spouse, someone in our own circle of friends, maybe somebody at work, or that neighbor that maybe is kind of annoying, but maybe really needs something from us. Because God then can still perform miracles today if we allow him to work through us as his compassionate followers. Jesus is calling us to be that young boy in the gospel, offering to Jesus what we have, entrusting to Jesus our time, talents, and treasures he has given us, with the hope he will multiply them and fill them with his grace. For nothing is impossible with God.